So as I said, I think the main transition here is previous survey methods tended to be human administered. Now we're going to have much more computer administered. Now, a survey researcher might say, actually, we've had a lot of non-human administered things in the past, and those are called mail-out, mail-back surveys. Right? A lot of surveys are done on paper. So those are called self-administered surveys. So that is certainly true, but a self-administered survey on paper and a self-administered survey on the computer, I would argue, are very different things. And by doing a self-administered survey on the computer, you enable lots of new things. So it is true. So I think though that switching from human administered to computer administered, it enables certain kinds of changes that we'll talk about, and it also requires certain kinds of changes. Much more, I think, the higher focus on user experience. So like being in a survey is really often a bad user experience. And so in a human administered survey where there's someone like sitting in your living room, it's much harder for you to like get up and walk away. I mean, no one is like chaining you to your chair, but like there is a person there. And with a computer administered interview, the person can just close their browser, they're done. So I think increasingly we'll have to do more to make surveys an enjoyable user experience. And some people say that might compromise measurement quality, but I would say having respondents who are not actually engaged in what's happening also compromises measurement quality. So now I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to spend most of the time telling you about a specific project I've done in this area. And I'm going to actually go again over the schedule. And then I'm going to cut the next part short, though. So the idea is I want to spend more time telling you about this project that I've done, less time telling you about projects that I haven't personally done. Because there's stuff about this particular project that I can tell you that is not written down in any other papers, or more about the process and how it all happened. And you can read much more about the other stuff in the papers. So this is a project that was really motivated by this website, kittenwar.com. So if you go to this website, you will see two really cute kittens. And then you can click on whichever kitten you think is cuter. And then you see another pair of kittens. And you can do this again and again and again. And before you know it, you spent 20 minutes clicking on kittens. So in addition to being just a really fun way to spend some time, there's also something a little more serious going on here. So if you click to see the winningest kittens, this is what you will see. That's pretty cute. And if you click to see the losingest kittens, this is what you will see. So it's very different. Let's go back here for a second. So what you see is that this very simple and enjoyable response mechanism is able to detect some very real signal. The other thing that's interesting to me about these kittens is that they were all uploaded by users. So to people who are used to like Web 2.0 technology and social media, the idea of user-generated content is just kind of an obvious thing. But it's really different than the way survey research normally happens. So if I wanted to have, let's say I wanted to do a survey to find the cutest kitten in the world. So I might go over to Firestone Library, which is right over there. I would look at the books in that library and find some cute kitten pictures. The ones that I think are likely to be other people think are cute, put them on the survey, and then have people decide from among the kittens that I have selected. But there's a couple problems with that. One is I myself am playing a big role in creating what the response options are. And more fundamentally, like the cutest kitten in the world is probably not in the library. And more generally, a lot of the things that we want to learn about in the world, we probably don't know about ahead of time. And in fact, the things that we want to know about ahead of time are really often the most valuable things. Like learning about the things that we already know about is not as valuable as learning about the things we don't know about. So another way to think about it is that kitten war really solves like a fundamental tension in the way that we collect social data. So between methods that are really good at quantification and methods that are really good at openness to new information. So surveys are really great at summarizing lots of information very quickly. The problem, though, is they're not open to new information because we've written all the questions and we've written all the answers. Now, there are other techniques that social scientists use, like interviews, focus groups, participant observation, ethnography. These things are much more open to new information, but they're slow and expensive and hard to quantify. So what this project is about creating a hybrid that combines the quantification of surveys with the openness of interviews. And we call it Wiki surveys. So just as Wikipedia evolves over time based on user input, imagine if you had a survey that evolved over time based on user input. And this would help you combine the quantification with openness. So we thought about these Wiki surveys, and we thought, like, what another way of thinking about what we were trying to do is, like, traditional survey research meets, like, Web 2.0 and user-generated content. What are some fundamental principles from each of these domains that we could combine into some new kind of measurement system? So we tried to come up with 3 properties that we think Wiki surveys should satisfy. So the first property is that they should be greedy. So in this case, greed is good. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So if you look at a lot of these web-based systems, they have very unequal amounts of contribution per respondent, per participant. So this is a cartoon of Wikipedia. This is the person that contributes the most. This is a rank order plot. The person that contributes the most contributes a ton of information, like 80 hours a week on Wikipedia, editing and improving it. There's a small number of people who contribute lots of information, and then there's a large number of people who contribute a little bit of information. So this is sometimes called the fat head and the long tail. And lots of online data looks like this. You've probably seen some version of this in a lot of the data that you've worked with. Now, one of the ways that Wikipedia works is it takes all that effort. It says if you want to work 80 hours a week, great. If you want to work 1 minute a month, great. Traditional social science methods are not like that. We only collect a fixed amount of information from each person. So if you think about a survey, if someone comes to you and says, I love your survey, I want to do it 100 times, we would say, like, are you okay? But then we would say, sorry, you can't do that. That is going to mess up my data. And if they say, you know what, your survey is pretty boring, but I'll give you like 2 minutes of my time, we would also say, sorry, you can't do that. That's going to create what we call item non-response, which is bad. So either you give me a fixed amount of information or we don't want you. So this is giving up a tremendous amount of information. So if Wikipedia allowed 10 and only 10 edits, they would lose about 95% of their edits. Like, there is so much information here and here that we're not able to access because we are not being greedy. So when I say we should be greedy, what I mean is we should take as much information as people are willing to give us. The second general principle of Wiki surveys is that they should be collaborative. So rather than having the entire instrument shaped by the researcher, I think the people who we're trying to learn about should have a role in creating what we learn. Right? That's how we can learn new things. And so we'll talk much more about mass collaboration tomorrow, I guess. Some more about mass collaboration tomorrow. So by collaborative, this is part of being open to new things. And then finally, they should be adaptive. And so we talked a little bit earlier about adaptivity. So if you treat your respondents' time as a valuable commodity, then you should only want to ask them things that maximize what you can learn. You want to ask them the most important thing in the next question. So often we are not really usually concerned about our respondents' time. I think that's true that many survey researchers don't value the respondents' time in a certain way. And if you think about it as an information maximization kind of process, then what you should do is use what you've learned before to change to figure out what's most important to learn next. One way to think about this, and traditional surveys are not like that in that normally we fix the questionnaire and the order of the questions, we do all the interviews, but after we've done like 500, we know much more than we knew at the beginning, but we're not able to adapt to take advantage of that. So now I should be clear, each of these, so a couple things to be clear about. So what's the difference between collaborative and adaptive? So collaborative is about being open to new information. Adaptive is about using the information you have more efficiently. Second thing to be clear about is none of these things are free lunches. So each of these introduces complexity. So when I present this to survey researchers and they're like, oh, you're going to change the question order as you go, that's going to introduce all kinds of problems. Yes, that is going to introduce problems. And you're going to be greedy, you're going to take different amounts from each person, that's going to introduce problems. Yes, that's going to introduce problems. But so the idea here is that we want to optimize the experience for the user and take all that complexity on the back end. Rather than a lot of surveys, what they do is they are really optimized more for the researcher and they push a lot of complexity onto the user. So we think we can do a better job handling the complexity in the back end and keep the front end experience clean and easy for the user. That's the idea. So then we said, okay, these are the principles, like let's like build a system that satisfies these principles. And that led to all our ideas. So that's the way I normally present it in a talk. Now that we're all here among friends, among all of you, and all of you on the live stream, you should also know that is not exact. We didn't like sit down and write this all down and then build the website. We were doing all this stuff simultaneously, right? So the idea that like we have all of our ideas and then we go do our science, I think that's not really how the world works. It's certainly not how it worked in this project. So we built this website. It's free and completely open source. Anyone in the world can use it. And anyone in the world can take the code and use it however they want. So someone who comes here, they can create their own wiki survey, which we host for them. So we're like the survey monkey of wiki surveys. And so let me give you an example of how it works. This is a project that we did with Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg's office in New York. The city was doing a long-term sustainability plan. So how can we make New York a greener and greater city? And they wanted to have ideas from citizens to be a part of this. So one of the things that they did, they would have like meetings in the like library, and anyone could come and talk, right? So then city council hearings and things like that. And those are great, but they realized only some people show up at those meetings, and it's very difficult to aggregate all that comes out of that meeting in a way that's fair and transparent. So you have a bunch of New Yorkers arguing about the city, and then somehow you're supposed to distill that in a way that's fair. That is a very challenging problem. So they were doing all that, and then they also did a wiki survey because they wanted to reach a broader group of people, and they wanted to have the process through which that feedback was aggregated more transparent and clean. So they picked one question, which do you think is a better idea for creating a greener and greater New York? And they seeded the wiki survey with 25 ideas that they had from their previous outreach efforts. These are some examples of the kinds of things that they used as seed ideas. So they dumped all that into our website, and then we created a wiki survey for them with its own URL. So allorideas.org/planyc. Then this is the view that a respondent would have. So you're presented with two choices, randomly pulled from the available alternatives. You pick one, then two new choices come up. You click again and again and again, and before you know it, you spent 20 minutes clicking on ideas. So you can see this is basically like kitten war for ideas. And then you can also add your own idea here, which goes into the queue to be voted on by others after it's been approved by a moderator to make sure it doesn't say F Mayor Bloomberg. Yeah.
Do they cycle through, or if they're shown?
How do we choose the pairs?
No, is there a replacement or not with the?
So is there a replacement in choosing the pairs?
Right. So
in choosing the ideas.
So that's what you see, right? You click
Yes.
provide funding, right?
Yes.
You click that. Would you ever see the provide funding option again? We'll take it.
Yes. So yes, you could. And the more general question is, how do we choose the pairs to maximize what we learn from each response? So that is the way a computer scientist would think about it, as like an optimization problem of what's the best way to learn from these responses. Another way to think about it also is, what kinds of responses do people like? What kinds of questions do people like to answer? Because here, anyone can respond as many times or as few times as they want. Remember, like greediness, people can leave whenever they want. So we have to make this a good user experience. So I can tell you a little bit about how we choose the pairs now, and then I can tell you a little bit about how we would like to choose the pairs in the future. And that is one of the things about this, which I'll talk about that in a second. So how do we choose the pairs now? So the simplest thing to do is you would choose from all pairs with equal probability. So that is very easy to implement very quickly, because the other thing, one constraint on this process is you have to return the next pair instantly. Right? So a lot of social scientists are not used to this idea that there has to be no latency. Like, we can run a regression and sit around for a while and go get a cup of coffee and whatever. Even if a regression takes 5 seconds, like, that's not such a big deal for us. But here, the next response has to be basically instantaneous. So what we do, so the simplest thing is choose all the pairs with uniform probability. That is not optimal because you end up, when a new idea gets added, a response about that idea is more valuable than a response about ideas that you've already had a bunch of responses about. So ideally, you'd like to show the new ideas with higher probability, because responses about them are more valuable. And so essentially what we do is we choose the pairs with probability inversely proportional to their number of appearances. So we show pairs with fewer appearances with higher probability. So the idea is we're trying to spread out the appearances across all pairs. So that's what we do now, because that's actually very easy to do quickly. What we would like to do, ideally, is have some model and then choose the parameters that we're trying to estimate as precisely as possible, and then choose the pair that we think will tighten the posterior distribution around that parameter the most. So that process there requires you to be able to fit the model in real time, which is something that you can do now. There's all these streaming methods. That is not something that I knew anything about when this project started, and that's not what we're doing now. And even more generally, this is a general theme that comes up when you have a system that you need low latency on, which a lot of our systems will become soon as we interact more through systems like this. It's best if you have some kind of knob that you can tune, where like the quality and the computing time can be traded off. So like right now, we don't have that. We just have this kind of ad hoc heuristic. But the beautiful thing about this system is it's easy for us to improve that, and the user doesn't have anything to worry about, right? We can continually improve the back end over time while the front end stays the same. Obviously, it will be available to the users to know what algorithm we're using, but most of them don't really care. And so once you have this system up and running and you have users, you can continue to improve it over time. So that is a main sort of statistical question or algorithmic question, is how to choose the pairs. Another main statistical / algorithmic question is how we make the results. So the other thing about this survey is that anytime anyone can click view results and they can see all the results. So how do we take these pairwise votes and calculate this score? I'll tell you about that in a second, but let me tell you what the score is. It goes from 0 to 100. The higher the better. And the score is an estimated probability that this idea will beat a randomly chosen other idea from a randomly chosen respondent. So we think that's a reasonable metric for people to understand. Yeah.
So does that downweight in some way people who vote a lot?
Yes, that is exactly what it does. So let me talk about why we chose that as the criteria. So there's really kind of two options. One is you want to treat each person equally, which is what we've opted for. The other is you want to treat each vote equally, and that leads to the other a different kind of system. And obviously both are reasonable. The reason why we wanted to treat each person equally is that has much more, that's more connected to how we think about surveys. We want to describe public opinion. That means we treat each person the same. And I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly we're estimating in a second. Oh, right here, in fact. So what exactly are we estimating? So this is the data structure that we get. We have votes that are nested within sessions. So a session is roughly like a person, but we don't have any logins. So we don't know. So for example, if you visit once from your laptop and you visit once from your desktop at work, that would be recorded as 2 sessions, even though it's the same person. So we see the pair that you were presented, and we see which one you've chosen. That's the data structure. The thing that we want to estimate is this thing that we call the opinion matrix, which is 1 row for each session, 1 column for each idea, and we want to estimate the amount that person session 1 likes idea 1, like free bike racks, and idea 2, how much do you think we should have free? One of the ideas was ban meat in Manhattan. So how much do people like that idea? So ideally, what we would like to know is for each person, how much they like each idea. That would be a very good description of public opinion. There's a number of problems that we run into in trying to do that. One is that they're usually, on the order of thousands of respondents and hundreds of ideas. So most respondents don't see most ideas. So then we're going to have to do a lot of imputation to try to figure that out. So roughly the way we deal with the imbalanced amount of data per person, for people who vote a lot, we have more information on their preferences. For people who vote a little, we're essentially going to borrow the preferences of other people. And there are a variety of ways that you could do that. The way we do it right now is pretty simple, and it can definitely be improved. So we estimate this opinion matrix, yeah?
How do you do it right now?
How do we do it right now? So the full details are in the paper. Roughly what we do is we make some assumptions. So we're going to assume a data generating process, and then we're going to try to find the parameters that are most consistent with that data generating process with the data. And the priors. So what is the data generating process we assume? So we make an assumption about how people vote based on their preferences. So there's like a number of different, basically we need something that takes the difference in preferences between bike racks and banning meat, and then that is continuous, and then we map that onto some probability of voting for one or the others between 0 and 1. So it's like a logit or a probit, so we use a probit for computational reasons. That's equivalent to something called the Thurstone-Mosteller model. It's very similar to something called the Bradley-Terry model. They're very similar. So that's how, then we also make this assumption that essentially that the distribution of support for each idea is normally distributed in the population with a different mean for each idea and with the same variance for all the ideas. So there's a lot of things about that assumption that you might not like, and I would totally agree with you. That assumption was really what we could make work computationally, but there are many more and better ways to do this. So for those of you who are computer science, you might recognize this is kind of like a matrix completion thing, and you might think of some kind of singular value decomposition. You could imagine doing something like that. There are lots of possible things. Yeah?
So suppose we wanted to do this, but for 2 groups of people
Yeah.
and compare them.
Yes.
Does that break any of our assumptions about causality? Because what I see as a member of a group is no longer independent from everyone else.
So it's like what Brandon was talking about yesterday a little bit. So we have had groups where so there's like a real example of this. So there's a group called Catholic Relief Services. They're like an NGO that helps people around the world. They have people spread out in many, many offices, and they wanted to have a single process that everyone could participate in, where an idea from a driver in their office in Haiti would get treated exactly the same as an idea from the CEO in the headquarters, right? Because one of the things about these ideas is they're not attached to anyone's identity. So a challenge that they run into, though, is not everyone there speaks the same language. So they set up 3 parallel wiki surveys, one in English, one in Spanish, and one in French. And so one of the things they have to decide is to what extent they should let these evolve independently. And what they decided is they didn't want to do that. And so what they did is every time an idea was uploaded in, let's say, Spanish, they would translate it into French and English and upload it in those as well. So they tried to keep them moving in sync. And then you can see to what extent the people who participate in the Spanish language one value this idea more or less than the people who participate in French or English. Yeah?
So you don't collect any socioeconomical variables or anything like that. It seems, what's the background behind that, and how much problems has that created for you guys? Because you cannot do any debating or any fancy stuff like that.
Yes. So it's true, we don't collect any of that stuff. And that's because I think, as I'll show in the next group of slides, like I think that is a thing of the past, collecting that stuff. Not having that stuff and using that stuff, but collecting that stuff. So if you think about it, how many people already know your age, level of education, gender? All this stuff is already in tons and tons of databases. So rather than build all this infrastructure to collect this, what we do is we enable people to link the data from their wiki survey to other kinds of data. So what we have is we have a system where you can pass a unique identifier in through the URL. Then that gets stored with all the responses from that person. Then you can export a CSV file from our website, and then you can merge together this unique identifier with this external information. So one way of saying is we're just planning for the future. Another way of saying is we just didn't want to build all this other infrastructure. So we enable this linking, and then in practice what can happen is you can now embed one of these wiki surveys inside of a more traditional survey. So you can you could embed this in like a traditional online survey where you collect this demographics, then directly pass this in with this, create an identifier, pass it in, and then you could export the 2 files and merge them together. Yep.
There's something else. I also see that you are showing the results to the people
Yes.
live. So did that actually have any impact on how they voted and
Yes.
stuff like that? Did you study that?
Yeah, well, so that's like very sensitive to me because that's like what my dissertation was about how knowing what's popular can impact what people do. So the way we handle that here, though, there's a very subtle thing here that's different. Is that we've decoupled the process of voting and viewing the results. So one of the things about the Music Lab experiment, which we'll talk about on Saturday, and a lot of other online aggregation systems kind of like this, is that they combine these 2 processes. So you would be able to see a list of ideas and then vote for the one that you want. That is a really bad system because of all the stuff from the music experiment and all that stuff. So here, you don't choose what idea you vote on, we choose it for you. So it makes it, and we've separated that from the results. So the only way that you could be influenced by what other people have said is if you look at this idea, provide funding to increase energy efficiency of buildings, PACE bonds. You might say, oh, I don't really know what PACE bonds are. So then you could go to the results, and then you would have to look through this entire list of results to see what other people thought, and then go back here and vote. That seems unlikely. So it is possible that people could be doing this, but and I should say also we have every single click that people make on the website, so we could look to see to what extent this is happening. I've never looked because I just don't think it's very plausible. The key is like we control what they vote on. They don't get to pick. That makes it much harder for these kinds of snowballs to form. It also makes the system much more efficient statistically, because again, we can get responses about the things we care about most. And it also makes the system much more manipulation resistant. So anytime you open something like this up online, then you're always worried about people who are going to like basically attack your site. So do you all know about President Obama's like open for questions So President Obama had this big thing where he was like, I want to answer not just questions from like reporters at a press conference, but I want to answer questions from anyone. And like, he used a system called Google Moderator, and basically he said like, everyone can participate in Google Moderator, and I'll answer the question that comes up at the top. And like, so sitting here at my desk, I'm going to know about the concerns of millions and millions of Americans. It's like a really very nice vision. And what actually happened is that the #1 question about the economy was about legalization of marijuana. The #1 question about healthcare was about legalization of marijuana. The #1 question about taxation was legalization of marijuana. So we can tax it, and so on. And so it ended up being kind of embarrassing. Also, as a side note, that a lot of the funding for all our ideas came from Google, which I don't think was unrelated to this kind of embarrassing thing happening. Obviously, I think they kind of knew that their thing in this space wasn't perfect, and they were interested in alternatives. So we could talk more about that later. So anyway, the point is that the reason that Google Moderator failed is because the system was very easy to game, because the marijuana people could all go look for the marijuana ideas and vote for them. But with Pairwise, if you want to support legalizing marijuana in New York, you have to vote a lot of times. Now, you could say, well, that's going to lead to a lot of junk data, but then that is also potentially detectable, right? Because we know the strength of these ideas, and so we can see a sequence of votes, and we can see that as being a very unusual sequence, and then we can imagine that that person might be trying to manipulate the system. Yep?
I was going to say, even easier, you can just look at how much time they spent on the questions,
Yeah.
right?
So you could do lots of things. So that, though, an attacker, there's ways around that. So basically all these kind of defenses, we don't have any provable guarantees, but we can do a variety of increasingly sophisticated things to try to prevent certain kinds of attacks. And I'd be happy to talk about that with you offline, because the more people know about the defenses that we have, the easier it is for them to defeat those defenses. And we are not saying that no one can defeat our defenses. We are sure that you can defeat our defenses. We have no doubt that you can do that. Yes?
Did you ever think of linking to like the paste bonds and different terms that people may not know? And then another question as well, you have the average that people have answered, and you talked about imputing for like the sparse matrix. Did you ever do like a recommended amount of questions to answer to try to make the answers like less sparse?
Okay, so 2 questions. So first, did we think about adding more information here, like linking or making these longer? So the answer is we thought about it and we decided not to do it because we wanted to keep the response process as easy as possible and lightweight as possible. So like another thing is all these ideas are limited to be 140 characters. This is designed to be lightweight and simple to keep people engaged. So another version of that question is like, maybe instead of choosing between 2, you should have a slider, or you should have, like, there's a lot of ways you could think of trying to make this more complicated to get more information, but we really, the whole time have tried to resist that. So then the second question is about, like, recommending a number of responses to people. So one of the big challenges with this is communicating to respondents what are the expectations. One of the things we did not realize is how much people already kind of know what to expect with a survey. Like if you give someone a survey, they've done it before. They're like, okay, I know this is a survey. This is what I'm supposed to do in a survey. And so here, like we've gotten emails from people that say, I think your website is broken. It never stops, right? And like I feel bad about that. Like we're not, we don't. So we want to, like, if you're used to a survey, right? You like give your opinions until the end and then you stop. So it's hard. One of the things that you see here, we've tried a bunch of different feedback mechanisms. So one of the other things, okay, so an advantage of doing this all through the computer is that you can and having lots of users so that you can do all kinds of A/B tests, right? So any idea that you have for actually getting people to respond more, you could actually test it and see whether it works. So one of the first things we tried is here, where we showed people how many votes they've cast, and then we show them the average number of votes. And so for those of you who, if a skewed distribution, the average is not really I mean, it is the average. There's nothing that is not true about this. But, like, we did not show them the median, right? So it turns out this doesn't actually increase voting very much. In part because we think people aren't really looking down here. So we talked some about like designers before, like developers and designers. So a lot of it, the site requires designers, and a number of designers have helped design this. This actually, what you're looking at here, is version 1.0 of the site. We have a second version, which looks a little bit different. We had to like recode the entire front end to make it work well on mobile. So now it works well on mobile, and thank you to the World Bank for that, by the way. So they wanted to, if you're gonna do some system building, then if you want it to be a live system that people will use, there's a lot of like maintenance, and like Brandon was talking about this, long-term costs, and we can talk about how to deal with that later. Yeah?
Just conceptually.
Yeah.
So let's say, we had a time machine and we could go back to the beginning of the Obama administration.
Mhm.
They could use this platform rather than the one that they use.
Mhm.
And, the result was there was a different set of priorities
Yep.
along each bucket, right? And Barack Obama was happier, and, marijuana was deprioritized, right? But how would we know? It's not clear to me, though, that, this is more revealing of people's souls, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's just the fact that's as social scientists we don't want to admit this, but maybe that's what people want. They just want marijuana legalization,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah,
all
yeah.
our complex ideas are
Yeah.
just So I don't.
Yeah, so this is one of the huge challenges with this system, and any new measurement system, is how you validate it, right? And so how do we know this is actually working better? And so if you think about how we validate other forms of survey research, so there are ways that we can validate behavioral questions, like how many times did you go to the doctor last month, or how much alcohol did you drink in the last week, or whatever. Those you can imagine somehow validating, and then being able to argue that one is better than the other. For these kind of attitudinal questions, it's very, very hard to validate. So the thing that I think so I don't think we've validated this at all, but I do think we have a finding that suggests that this is worth trying to validate. And I will tell you about that finding in a second. Yeah?
So I understand the problem with validation, but at least you could get some table stakes by saying something about retest reliability, right? And this seems like it's really easy to pipe in things they've already answered, right?
Yes. So we could split. Okay. So there's a couple ways of thinking about what that means. So one is, for a given respondent, we could try to assess the reliability of their answers. Another thing, though, that might miss is the way that there could be path dependence within the ideas somehow, right? So we could imagine splitting the groups and then having two parallel wiki surveys. But then we run into this challenge that certain ones of these things that we might like to do scientifically, the users might not like. Like the groups that are using the system are depending on us to do the best we can with it. So these individual level voting things, I would feel comfortable doing that if we had a good way to handle the analysis. But the idea of splitting it up, and then the different communities not seeing, let's say a church was using this to decide what they should do, and half the people in the church saw one set of results and half saw a different set.
Yeah.
That we can't do. So there's benefits and drawbacks of working in a live system. Okay.
What about, I'm sure people, because they don't see all the cards that are in the deck,
Yep.
propose the same ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So do you kind of manually combine categories before you do the opinion matrix?
No. So I'm really against things where we decide things. I'm really for letting the data decide those things. So if you say two things are the same, that's just your guess that they're the same. So if they're exactly the same, then yes, exactly the same, fine. But like, think about the example from the chapter about aid to the poor and welfare. So are those the same or are they different? So you, as a researcher, might think they're the same, but empirically, people respond to them differently. So to me, that's data that I want to have. And so my view of it would be you put both of those into the Wiki survey, and then you see what happens. And if they come out the same, then you know that people think of them the same. And if they come out different, then you know that people think about them differently. So a lot of our intuition about needing to make surveys short comes from a world where we need everyone to answer every single question in the survey. But this whole thing is set up so that you can have many, many, many ideas. And so there's no reason to artificially restrict the number of things in the system. So let me give you another example of like increasing specificity is also really helpful for this large number of ideas. So if we were going to do like actually this is how the very first version of this was something we did with the undergraduate student government here at Princeton, and Josh Weinstein was the president there then. And like in a normal survey, you might get feedback like improve the dining halls. But in something like this, you could get much more granular feedback, like bring back Taco Tuesdays, which was one of the actual ideas, or make it less noisy. Or there's all these things that go into improving the dining hall. And again, having a system where you can collect information about lots and lots of ideas allows you to get much more granular, specific ideas. Yeah.
So speaking of like not making research decisions, isn't there a moderation or approval process
Yes.
for these ideas?
Yes.
What do the ideas that you don't approve look like?
So I personally approve pretty much everything in the ones that I do. But part of the challenge here is that I have a vision for what I think this should be, and then I have users who don't necessarily share that same vision, and so I enable them to make certain changes, and I try to set the defaults in a way that I think are appropriate. So in terms of what users don't kind of activate, they don't activate things that they think are like profanity or stuff like that. They would also, in the New York City case, I think, well, not the New York City case. In other cases, they might not allow things that are just impractical. Like what should we do? Like put air conditioning, like put a dome over Manhattan and have air conditioning or whatever. Like there's just not a lot of reason to collect feedback on that. And then also some people are worried about this duplicate ideas thing, but I push them to not decide, but they don't always listen to me. Okay, so other questions? Yeah.
How do you manage like groups reaching out to you to do this? Is there any support that you provide, or what's the management perspective?
Yeah, so there's a couple things about that. So first is it's fully automated in the sense that you can just go on there and create a wiki survey, you can manage it yourself, you can download all the data yourself. So we have like 10,000 of these. And so like right now today, I haven't checked my email, but I would guess a couple signups have happened today. I would guess there are probably a couple thousand votes today while we're having this conversation. So it can all happen without me, but it's also the case that there are requests that come in. Some of them are, I would say, like customer support, kind of traditional, like it's not working right, and it really does work, but they just weren't looking in the right place. So I actually handle all those myself. And then there are some that are like requesting new features. So like we just, actually this is a good example, we just had a request a couple days ago for HTTPS. So right now we have HTTP, and we should have HTTPS. I know encryption is good, but we just never did it. And now someone needs HTTPS because they want to embed it inside another thing that only allows HTTPS embeds. So I was like, great, we should have had HTTPS a long time ago. This is a good reason to get that done now. So then I have a developer who we talked about. The developer that I work with now, his name is Luke. He works for a company called Agathon Group, and they're awesome. And so then I just send this email to Luke and say, I think, can you figure out how to do HTTPS? Like we've talked about it before. Is it ready to do now? And then he investigates and figures out how long it's gonna take, which is equivalent to how much it's gonna cost. And then he gives an estimate, and I say, okay, let's do it. And then he does it, and then it's done. And then they send me the bill. We've talked about like students versus professionals. So a huge advantage of working with a professional is that they answer your emails, they do the work right the first time, they are available, and they stand behind their work. So if I had to try to chase down some undergrad who did something 2 years ago, she might have an internship at Google now, is not able to respond to the email. Like, if you have a professional, you can operate in a professional way, I guess. Yeah? So I should say I saw people gasp when I said that I handle a lot of these support emails. So one thing is, like, I really like it. I mean, I don't like the support emails, but, you know, I like this project. And so I want it to work. And who else is going to do it, right? Like, this is not something, in my opinion, so one way of doing a lot of this stuff is having grad students do the work. But, like, grad students should not be answering support emails. Grad students should be doing research. Grad students should not be figuring out HTTPS. Like, they should be doing their research. So parts of these projects allow graduate students to do research, and like with the paper that I did on this was collaborative with a graduate student named Karen Levy, who's awesome. But like some of the stuff has to be done by professionals, and probably in the long run I should not be doing these support emails. But there are not a ton of them, to be honest. Like, there's not a ton of them because we've worked really hard to build better support infrastructure. So now we could talk a lot about how to not have a lot of support emails, but it's a separate thing. Yeah?
You have 10,000 surveys. How are there not a lot of support emails?
Because 10,000 is cumulative. It's not 10,000 are active each day.
How long has it been?
Oh, it's been years. So that's another thing about this project that I think is, like, we started doing this in like 2010 or something, and like the basic infrastructure is still, the basic interface is still the same, which is something that I think is actually kind of neat. Like, a lot of things in this space change very quickly, and like it's hard to imagine something that you did in 2010 still seeming interesting and current in 2017. So that makes me feel like we've somehow picked we picked something kind of fundamental, and that it still seems to have this ability to stay interesting over longer periods of time. Okay. So what happened? So the mayor's office sent out these tweets to recruit people through social media. Now, this is not a random sample. I'm very aware that this is not a random sample, but you can see how the interviewing and the sampling are really modular. If you wanted to bolt on a different sampling process, you could. Any way that you get people to the website, you could do that. So you could use an online panel, which claims to give you a more demographically diverse group of people. So what happened? So here is a plot like that cartoon I showed you before of Wikipedia. So this is the number of participants. We had about 1,500 sessions. These are the number of responses. So we had one person who made 800 responses.
And then emailed you to say it never stopped.
And then we had a lot of people who gave a small number of responses, just like Wikipedia. And then also for idea contribution, we had one person who contributed lots of ideas and lots of people who contributed little ideas. So we built the system to enable this kind of behavior, and this is exactly what we got. Then here's the result that I think makes this worth validating, and this is the most important result. These are the top 10 scoring ideas, and all the ideas in blue were uploaded by users. So 8 of the top 10 ideas were uploaded by users, and not in the set of things that the mayor's office had initially. So this was a finding we kept having, and so we said, what is going on here? And so Karen interviewed a bunch of the Wiki survey creators to find out what are these ideas that are scoring really well. So she found and we found that these ideas that are uploaded in the score well fall into two main categories. One is what we call alternative framing. So here's one. Keep NYC's drinking water clean by banning fracking in NYC's watershed. That was uploaded by a user, very high scoring. So Karen asked the mayor's office, you knew about fracking. Fracking is like a big thing. Why didn't you? And the mayor's office said, oh, we don't talk about it that way. We would say protect the watershed, not protect the watershed from fracking. And so there are ways that people can express these ideas, that users can express the ideas that resonate more with other users rather than researchers expressing the ideas. So this is another reason why I'm really against aggregating ideas, because part of what the value of this is a new way of framing something that you think might be the same. Yeah?
I mean, you also might think that maybe the city politically doesn't want to use that language and assume it themselves. So you're also opening up the possibility to get around your own kind of political obstacles you might have as institutions. Your
political obstacles or your blinders.
Yeah.
I mean, you might not even know. I think really as creators of surveys, we have to be open to the fact that there's a lot we don't know. The second is what we call actually novel information. So these are things that they did not know ahead of time. So one, plug ships into electricity grids so they don't idle in port, reducing emissions equivalent to 12,000 cars per ship. So that was uploaded by a user. It scored really high. You might wonder if this is true. For a good thing to think. So it turns out it's kind of true. So it's about 5,000 cars per ship. So this they had never heard of before. They investigated it, and it turned out to be a really good idea, and now this is in the plan. So again, there's stuff out there. If we just have a way of being open to it, we can potentially learn a lot of new things. Now, we subsequently kind of have this heuristic argument for why we think this is going to happen pretty much every time you do this. So if you do a wiki survey, I can bet you a beer that, or the drink of your choice, that the best ideas will be uploaded by users. And so let me show you that heuristic argument. So here's the ideas from New York. So here are the seed ideas. There's 25 ideas. This is their score. Here are the ideas that are uploaded by users. Here are their scores. So there's two things that you should notice about this. First is that there are many more user-uploaded ideas. There's like 10 times more ideas. Second is that those user-uploaded ideas have higher variance. So if your idea is we open up this system and we get all kinds of junk, that is true. A lot of it that comes in is junk, right? A lot of the worst ideas come from users. But if you care about extreme cases, if you only care about finding the best thing, then you want a high volume, high variance data source. That's where the extreme cases are going to be. So you want to be open to this. Ordinarily, as researchers, we think of variance as a bad thing that we want to kind of avoid. But if we have an appropriate way of sifting through all that comes in, then we really, really want to be open to high variance if we care about finding the best things. Yeah?
Wait, so what was number 244 there?
Oh, I don't even want to say.
Whoa. Turn off the live stream.
So, you mean, what is this worst idea?
Yes.
We'll look it up after. We'll turn off the live stream. So again, this is a fundamental thing here. This is not specific to this wiki survey, and it's not really specific to wiki surveys in general. In some ways, this might be a nice transition into what we're going to do tomorrow, is if you care about extreme cases, you want to be open to high variance, high volume data sources. And that is actually a great transition to what we're going to do tomorrow. So one other thing I want to say is that this idea here also is that this can become a self-sustaining, virtuous cycle. So a lot of research, you do the research, it's really hard, you push the boulder up the mountain, and then you got to walk down the mountain again and start pushing it up again, and the next boulder. So imagine if, though, as you did something, it became easier and easier to do the next things and the next things. So sometimes this happens in certain kinds of, if you build certain infrastructure to run group experiments, for example, it becomes easier and easier as you do more and more. But a lot of research is not like that. And so you can imagine how having a good website means we get more users. More users means we can do more research. More research means we can have a better website. And you get this virtuous cycle. And so this virtuous cycle, we also try to feed this by openness. So the whole thing is open source. You make it very easy for people to take their data out of the system and analyze it however they want. So this is the idea. So as I said, we're currently hosting about 10,000 of these with about 50,000 ideas and 15 million votes. And some of the users include governments. So this is the House of Representatives of Brazil, e-Democracia. So they wanted to have a user participation system. The first thing they built was like a wiki where people could edit actual text of proposed bills. And they ended up not getting a lot of users, which you might imagine, given that editing wiki style a law is not something tons of people want to do. So they wanted to have a different system that was easier for people to participate in, and then start to gradually move them into this more complicated system. So the wiki survey, very easy, much easier to get people started. The UN, they had like an expert consultation. Not everyone in the world can come to this expert consultation. So they have a wiki survey beforehand. Everyone in the world can participate. They print out the top 10 ideas that come out of that and give it to everyone in the expert consultation. So this way, not everyone can physically be there, but the ideas from everyone can be in the room at that time. Occupy Wall Street. This was, they wanted to have their list of demands. I don't know if you remember that. So someone created a wiki survey for them. If they had just, been able to create a list of demands. So they did, using an open, transparent, democratic process. Anyway, that's complicated. Wikipedia, and then some companies have used it as well. So let's take a break. Yeah?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So how do you then recruit the participants? Maybe I missed
Yes, no, I didn't say that. I would say that's not my problem. So my problem is to recruit the people that want to create the wiki surveys, and then those people have to recruit the participants.
And do they have mailing lists?
So mailing list is the most common thing. So the most common thing is mailing lists because they're used by groups. Yeah. Another way that they can do it is through a widget. So you can embed a wiki survey in your website, just like you can embed a YouTube video in your website. So that specific, building out that functionality, the first version was done by a student here named Brian, and like that, the idea was we wanted to bring the wiki survey to the people, not bring the people to the wiki survey. So again, like optimizing for the participant means bringing it to wherever they are.
Facebook? Can you embed?
I don't know about Facebook. Possibly. We could talk about that. And then like that's the kind of thing where
Gotta keep like
we would have to keep maintaining it. Maybe someone wants to do that. We could get someone to do that on a volunteer basis and then integrate that into the code base. So some of the code base has improved by people who have specific use cases. They build it, then we integrate it in for everyone. So the most common user contribution to the code base, by the way, is translations. So it's been translated into about 15 different languages, all by volunteers. Okay.
I can ask you during the break, but I'm curious what people actually do with these. I was working with a company with a very similar system. We're supposed to bring up ideas, but a lot of the quote-unquote ideas were just like expressions of some emotion. It wasn't like, change our strategy in this way or the other. The other thing is that a lot of people's preferences really depended on who they thought was going to implement the idea, and just the description of the idea, wasn't ultimately that useful or whatever. So what do they do with them?
Yeah. So I would say, again, not my problem. That's their problem. But I've worked with a bunch of people using it, and I would say a couple of things happen. So first is, what are your expectations for what comes out of the system? So if you think of this as a decision-making system, then I think that's unrealistic expectations. So what you should do is think of it as a system that enables you to be open to new information. And then you, as a decision maker, have to combine that new information with all the other information that you have about how much things cost, what are the other constraints that you face, and make a decision. So I view it as like a decision aid that has to be combined with other information about all the constraints. So if you think about the New York example, you could have said these comparisons aren't really fair comparisons because some of these things are really easy and some are very expensive. Some were like build new subways and others were like bike racks. So it's like not even remotely comparable. And so you should like include information about the cost or somehow. And I say like that's putting too much burden on the system and the users. Like that should be done by the decision maker, and let's keep it as simple as possible for the user. The other thing is I think in a lot of situations there's a real benefit to even just showing your willingness to be open. You know, like this idea of procedural justice. People are more willing to accept the outcome of some process, like a court decision, if they believe that the decision process was fair. And so in some sense, just being open is helpful so that when you go forward, everyone feels like they had a chance to have an impact.